So ultimately, these people, though, they come to America in this case, and they see our glorious history. They see our inventions. They see that almost all of the discoveries, inventions, and the medicines, everything is attributable to us. They see that we've named everything, built everything, that our civilizations are, in their estimation, I don't have to say this, I can be neutral on this, but in their estimation, with their feet, they have voted and said that our civilizations are better than the ones they build. That's why they come to our civilizations. And so there is a natural jealousy and envy there. Now, however, that does not necessarily translate into, and the same thing holds true for white anti-whites, and I'll just speak to that in one moment. It doesn't necessarily translate into a movement that will result in what we're seeing today throughout the West. Now, when it comes, just for a second, if I could jump on the other rail, and that is white anti-whites. How do you get a white anti-white? These are people who, although they are white, they don't feel that they have a connection to that glorious history. They don't feel like they have a connection to the beauty that they see in Western kind. They don't see themselves as healthy as the most healthy members, or as intelligent as the most intelligent members of Western kind. And don't we see that when we look at a group or an organization of anti-white whites? We see the sickliest members. We see the ugliest members. We see, even if they are filthy rich, something is wrong with them. There's something they're jealous of. Now, in healthy people, we take jealousy and envy and we do a couple things with it. Sometimes we deflect it. Sometimes, the best of us, we use it as fuel to spur us forward. We see the guy with the Ferrari and we think to ourselves, I'd like to own a Ferrari one day. I'm going to work harder at my job so that I can have one. I'd like to have that good looking woman that's with him in the Ferrari. I'm going to absolutely want a Ferrari that much more. But what happens is, when it comes to anti-white ideology, is that you then have a scenario where you have a pool of people. And now if non-whites were never in this situation, if there weren't any anti-white non-whites present, would we still end up with an anti-white movement? Maybe, but that's not our reality. We might have to deal with these sickly members of society that would create ideologies to move against and deprive and undermine the whites in our civilization. And also, let me make one thing clear as well, and that is that when these people, white and non-white, develop this jealousy and envy for us, they don't develop it just for, or they don't, I guess, inflict this harm. They don't get their retribution just on the ones who are the whites who are more attractive or wealthier or healthier or whatever. The entirety of the white race becomes an avatar for those individuals, for that glorious history, for that better look, for that more wealth, for that better health, all of that. We all become an avatar. So the guy on your corner that's a plumber, if he's not equally anti-white, then he becomes an avatar for all of those things about whites that these anti-whites are jealous of. Now, here's what happens for the average anti-white, white or non-white. They see themselves as a victim of their circumstance, and they don't know who to blame. There's no God to punish. There is chance. They can't punish chance. They can't punish fate, but they can get revenge on the group that makes them feel less than what they would like to feel. Ultimately, it is a desire to punish those who make these individuals, these anti-whites, feel inferior to the rest of the population. That is the white race. Then you have very clever people who go to this very fertile soil of disenchanted, disaffected, many of them mentally unwell people, and they go to them with clever slogans and clever arguments, and they say, we can give you all that you've been denied. We can supply you all that you've been deprived of if you just endorse these positions. Now, the positions are just pretexts. They come up with intellectualized pretexts, moralized pretexts, and sentimentalized pretexts. And we see that these things conflict all of the time. They conflict. And that's why we have conservatives, Sivnats, and the like who scratch their heads and say, how can anti-whites hold these positions? They're so contradictory. Well, on the surface, the positions are contradictory, and that's a good place to begin. But the place you ultimately need to arrive at is that there is no contradiction. The ultimate objective of the anti-white, whether white or non-white, is to inflict harm on Western kind because that feels good. They've gained in their minds the right of defense. The ultimate goal is to inflict harm or destruction on Western civilization, because those are the bolsters that we need that secure our civilization. It's like the child who builds the sandcastle that is then destroyed by the child who can't. That is the only way that the child who cannot build the sandcastle can interact with it. The only way that he can level the playing field and make everything equal again. And it's something I just tweeted recently, that equality is really the claim of the loser. It's the demand of the loser. It's the demand of the person who is inferior, the person who is the slower runner, the person who has the lower IQ. It is the demand built on an artificial edifice of morality. Because if they didn't build it on this, and this is just what I said a moment before, these pretexts, if they didn't build it on this artificial edifice, they wouldn't be able to advance that agenda in Western civilization, because quite simply, to the general white population, you cannot make a case for harming someone or inflicting harm because they have it better than you do. You can in other civilizations around the world. You can say it is unfair because of X, Y, or Z, and that's all I need. But in the West, you have to say, well, it was because they were oppressed, and here's my intellectual argument. Or there's a brown baby with tears in his eyes, so here's my sentimentalized argument. Or we have to be good people, and as good people, we need to take care of those, and we need to make up, and there's your moralized argument. So what I tell people and what I teach people is that when an anti-white brings an argument like this to you, simply reject it out of hand and say that no matter your argument, if you arrive at an anti-white solution at the end of all of that verbiage, however long it takes you to say it, if you arrive at an anti-white conclusion, that you reject it. So ultimately, it begins in really a sick approach, or a broken approach, an inappropriate approach to the feelings of jealousy and envy. We have all felt them, to the feelings of jealousy and envy. And then once in power, this transmogrifies into a satiation of other desires, carnal desires, desires for wealth, desires for sex, desires for our women, desires for our possessions. That then becomes a bit more apparent. But it begins in this very base, very carnal environment of feeling that ultimately they feel victimized. And as victims, and this is very important, and last thing I'll say about it, as victims, they gain the right of self-defense. They view themselves as victims. They're not actual victims. They name themselves victims, and by so doing, they get the right of self-defense. And that is why you see the fanaticism in their eyes. That's why you see that absolute crazed rage in their eyes. That's why they will drive 700 miles to participate in a rally just to shout down Richard Spencer when he wants to say a few positive things about our people, because they think that they have this right of self-defense. Because when they look around, they see the beautiful whites, they see the things that we have done, and it's time now, and it's justice now to tear that all down so that we can then have equality. That is where that true fanaticism comes from. And if we understand what their real motivation is, then we can deal with it. And it's important for another reason too. Actually, this will be the last thing, I'll pass it over. The other reason it's important is because how we view our problems determines how we are going to respond as a people. If we continue to view these problems as these multifarious, absolutely plexiform scenarios that have to sort of like the starlit sky at night in the darkest part of the country where there's no light pollution. If our problems look like that night sky, we will never find a solution. We will never unite as a single people, as a single entity against our enemies. We and our enemies, make no mistake about this, our victimizers. That is exactly what they are. We have to view them for what they are and for the actions, the harm that they inflict on us and our civilization. And only then can we unite as a single entity and find safety for ourselves as individuals by finding safety for ourselves as a people.
I'll just briefly add to that by saying, well, Joaquim's question was, how natural is this versus unnatural? And I would sum it up by saying that it's a natural response to an artificial situation. So we were artificially put into this multicultural situation, and people were incentivized to come in or brought in. Even Tony Blair's government were going out to Middle Eastern countries and looking for people to bring back to Britain. So it was ramped up, and this is a natural response because even though, as Jason just said, these people vote with their feet, they're voting with their appetites. It's more that lower chakra. They could be more comfortable. They could have more money. They'll be a little safer. On that basic level, who wouldn't want to move towards that for them and their family, themselves and their family? But everything that comes along with it, the sum total of Western civilization and the different ways that it expresses through particular ethnicities in different European countries, they're not comfortable with that. So that is where this artificial situation was created. But then there's a natural response to say, hey, wait a second, we're not being represented in the media, and the people on the greeting cards don't look like us, and well, these holidays don't really resonate with us, so maybe we'll invent our own holidays. So that desire or that instinct is there, but of course it's exacerbated 100-fold by certain alien elites who have this come from a diaspora mindset, and so they have a different strategy and are drumming that up. They're whipping up that sentiment in these people who've been brought there. So it's this perfect combination where the interests of globalism and global finance and borderless business dovetail perfectly with this. It's this perfect storm. And that's why you don't necessarily need this perfectly laid out conspiracy theory. That's not to say that there aren't conscious agents in this, because I absolutely believe that there are conscious agents in this. But I've had people say to me, look, I've worked in big corporations, and even these smart executive types, they can't even get themselves on the same page. You want me to believe that over the course of the last couple hundred years, there's been this perfectly laid out conspiracy? Well, there's fits and starts of it. But the essential thing is that white people are being incentivized to basically be anti-white, to use Jason's term. So there's a whole system of rewards around that, and it goes in tandem with the international finance or the international business, because we all know, everyone in this audience knows, that as a whole, we're probably the people who are most resistant to that kind of thing. So what you end up with is just this whirlpool, this spiral where, yeah, it's not going to be this perfectly straight line, but events are coming towards this point, this one point, where we now find ourselves in the situation we do in 2019, and it's been happening for many years prior to this, of course, where you're only accepted as a white person in white societies if you're self-flagellating, which doesn't make a lot of sense. I think it goes to, again, trying to think through this, I think it goes to these twin aspects that exist within us. I think we're polar people in more ways than one. And it goes to what we were speaking about in the beginning with Richard and the Puritans. This notion, on the one hand, of this egalitarianism that can get out of hand and even want to punish others if they step out of line. The other twin aspect of that, twinned in our soul and our psyche, is that aristocratic striving, that exploration, the Faustian, that kind of thing that we were discussing as well. I think what happened is a perverted version of that egalitarian strain was happened upon and exaggerated. It was something that existed in us. This is something that we have to acknowledge, something that existed in us, but the circumstances and people who have other agendas conspired to, again, make it much worse than it is, pervert it. So this is where we've ended up, where that benevolent egalitarian strain has been, we kind of see the animus of it, this negative expression of it, and that aristocratic striving is being stifled and being taken down. So I think within ourselves, turning inward, it's a large, like the big 30,000-foot view of a lot of this is getting the balance back, is getting the balance right, is finding the healthier expression of those egalitarian instincts. Obviously, we should turn them in towards ourselves, our mothers, the feminine instinct should be caring about our own people, not looking out to the rest of the world, and properly balancing that again with that more aristocratic striving, which has been the subject of tremendous attack. So I think we have to think of it as these kind of like a strand of DNA. These two things exist in us. They're not going away. We have to be self-reflective about that, realistic about that, and understand how to get them back into proper proportions.
I think there's another aspect you could say is a power aspect to all this. And that is this, the elites are attempting to create a manageable population. And I think they're wrong about this ultimately, but they're right about it in the short term, in the sense that you can create a polyglot horde society that is going to be more easily managed. And that the white middle class represents a counter elite, but ultimately a potential counter elite. I mean, the white middle class, or I shouldn't say even middle class, the white middle, you know, we don't know who we are. We don't have defined leaders. We don't, you know, it's kind of, I remember in, what was it? The Dark Knight, where the Joker says, you know, I'm like a dog. If I ever caught a car, I wouldn't even know what to do with the fender. I think the middle class is a bit like this. If the white middle Americans came into power, we wouldn't even know what to do. We don't have a sense of ourselves. We don't have a leadership hierarchy. We're not ready to rule, but we do represent a potential counter elite to the current global elite. And as such, we are a threat, because only we would do it. And so there's this quest to bring in a more manageable, pliable population. And there's no question that elites in big capitalism, in big academia, in big government, big all sorts of things, love all of this stuff. They love having their little token minorities, and they love managing these problems and talking about white racism and stuff. I mean, this is just it's a problem for which they have a million solutions. They just can't get enough of it. It is not a problem in their minds. And so you're creating this manageable population, whereas the middle Americans are kind of a potential threat. I don't think sadly, we're not much of a threat, but we're at least a potential one. And so there is just a strict power dynamic at play. And I don't think that should be underestimated. I would push back a little bit to Jason when he's talking just about these things arising in terms of resentment. I don't doubt that, but the real resentful, blacks or Hispanics or Puerto Ricans or whatever, they're not ruling over us. They aren't making the rules of the game. They're kind of pawns within it. I don't deny the power of resentment. I actually totally agree.
Yeah, as I said, it's being exploited. It's just being exploited.
Definitely.
Right. I mean, these at the bottom, whether I say at the bottom, economically or what have you, it's sort of when we talk about like resentment or jealousy, it seems always to, perhaps it's just a nature of growing up in the West and having the wealth that we have, but we automatically sort of couch it in monetary terms. And it's so, if someone is wealthy, if the particular non-whites or the white anti-whites are wealthy, then somehow they can't be jealous. When in fact, if you know these people, of course they can be jealous. They can be jealous of the good looks. They can be jealous of the better health. They can be jealous of, and more importantly, the history, the deep history. And that I submit to everyone on the panel and the audience. It is this glorious history of ours that everyone else on the planet lacks, that they wish they had. If you have grown up with people of other ethnicities, as I have many other ethnicities, you will know that there is an intense jealousy over that glorious history that we have, the grand castles and everything. The closest they come are some of these old kingdoms in Asia that were, for the most part, sedentary. I mean, aside from these moments in history where they had these big pushes, these particular individuals who seem to have come from other worlds, like a Genghis Khan or something like this, for the most part, with the number of people they had in their populations, they didn't do even a fraction of what we had done in our history. So it is absolutely remarkable. People like to compare. They say, well, look at what the whites did relative to the entire non-white population. But we are a fraction of their number, for God's sakes. It is far more than just we have developed and built 90, 95 or more percent of all inventions and discoveries. No, it is far more than that, because we are a fraction of their number, folks. So when we see this movement, when we see, say, like the Puerto Ricans or whatever at the bottom of this economic spectrum, certainly their jealousy is going to incorporate the wealth aspect of it, which is probably the wealth and the beauty is the most salient, the things that they can really, get their hands on.
They don't care about castles in Bavaria. They just want women.
Right, exactly.
Money.
Well, these people are
I care about the castles very much.
I know. We're the only ones who care.
These people
look at what the Turks did to Hagia Sophia. If you ever visit Hagia Sophia, it's not well maintained. They don't give a shit. They just like the fact that they can sell you a ticket to go view it. It's absolutely pathetic.